Coming back to yourself sounds beautiful until you actually try to do it. Because finding yourself again is not like remembering something. It's more like meeting someone you haven't spoken to in years and realizing you no longer know how to talk to them. This is about why the return is so much harder than people make it sound. Just come back to yourself. It's advice you've probably heard, in some form, from a book, a video, a well-meaning friend. And it's not wrong exactly, but it makes the process sound simpler than it actually is. Like there is a version of you waiting patiently, fully formed, just behind a door you forgot to open. The truth is messier, because the self you are trying to come back to is not waiting fully formed. It is partial, unclear in places, mixed in with years of adaptations that became so familiar, they started to feel like personality. When people talk about coming back to yourself, it sounds like retrieval. Like the information is still there, intact, just waiting to be accessed again. But identity does not work like a memory you can simply recall. It is built through use, through practice, through the accumulation of choices that reflect what you actually want, what you actually believe, what you actually feel, repeated often enough that they form a coherent sense of self. And if you spent years making choices based on what others wanted, what kept the peace, what felt safest, then the muscle responsible for making choices based on your own preferences simply did not get the practice it needed. It's not gone, but it is underdeveloped, which means coming back to yourself is not remembering who you used to be. It is building, somewhat from scratch, the capacity to know who you are right now. This is why the process feels less like returning and more like beginning, because you are not simply removing a costume to reveal the person underneath. You are in many ways learning basic things for what feels like the first time. What do you actually enjoy? Not what you've learned to perform enjoyment of, but what genuinely brings you something. What do you actually believe? Not what you've absorbed from the people whose approval mattered most, but what holds up when you examine it on your own. What do you actually want from your relationships, your work, your days? Not what seems reasonable to want, not what wouldn't inconvenience anyone, but what you would choose if the choice were entirely yours. These are not questions with quick answers, and the disorientation of not having quick answers is often mistaken for failure, for being behind, for somehow doing this wrong. But you are not doing it wrong. You are doing something that takes time by its very nature, because you are essentially relearning how to know yourself. There is a kind of grief that comes with this process that doesn't get talked about very often. The grief of realizing how much time was spent not knowing yourself. The grief of looking back at years of decisions made from a place of accommodation rather than authenticity. The grief of relationships built on a version of you that wasn't entirely true, and the complicated feelings that come with wondering whether those relationships would have survived the real you. This grief is valid. It is not self-pity. It is not dwelling. It is the appropriate response to recognizing a loss, even if the loss is something as intangible as years spent disconnected from yourself. And making space for that grief, rather than rushing past it toward healing, is actually part of the process. You cannot fully arrive at a new relationship with yourself while skipping over the mourning of the old one. Despite all of this, despite the difficulty, the disorientation, the grief, coming back to yourself is possible. Not because it's easy, but because the capacity for self-knowledge is not something you permanently lose. It is something you stop practicing. And things that are unpracticed can be practiced again, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of false starts and moments where you genuinely don't know what you think or want or feel. Each small moment of checking in with yourself, even when the answer is unclear, is practice. Each small choice made from your own preference rather than someone else's comfort, even a tiny one, even one that feels insignificant, is practice. And practice over time rebuilds capacity. Starting over sounds discouraging. Like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that everything before was wasted. But starting over is not the same as starting from nothing. You are not building a self from zero. You are building from everything you have lived. The relationships, the disappointments, the moments of unexpected clarity, the things you noticed even when you couldn't act on them. All of that is material. You are not erasing the past to start over. You are using it, finally, in service of becoming someone you actually recognize. If coming back to yourself feels like starting over, I want you to know that this is not a sign you are behind. It is a sign that you are finally doing something that requires real effort, instead of the effortless, practiced motion of becoming what others needed. This will not happen quickly. And that is not a failure of the process. That is simply what rebuilding actually looks like. You do not have to know exactly who you are by the end of this video. You only have to be willing to keep asking, slowly, imperfectly, for as long as it takes, to meet yourself again, and this time, stay.